Growing numbers of children are arriving at secondary schools in Wales with reading levels way below where they should be. Schools are following guidance and using teaching methods that some claim are not just outdated but damaging. So why is this happening, and are kids being set up to fail from a young age? I'm Sangeeta Kandola, and this is what you need to know. I'm joined now by our Wales reporter, Rhys Williams. Thank you so much for being here. Rhys, you've been researching reading levels in Wales. How bad is it there compared to the home nations, for example?
Well, it's difficult to tell, first of all, how well very young kids are reading in Wales, because unlike the rest of the UK, Wales doesn't take part in an international test called PIRLS, which is taken by 9 and 10-year-olds. There's no phonics screening check, for example, like there is in England, or national test data we can use to compare. So we're reliant on PISA tests, which is an international education test taken by 15-year-olds. And in PISA tests, the reading levels of Welsh children have been far below the rest of the UK and the international average for decades now. And in the most recent test 2 years ago, they fell to their worst ever score. There's also the fact that Estyn, the school's watchdog here in Wales, so the equivalent to Ofsted in England, for example, they said back in 2012 that a fifth of children were leaving school functionally illiterate. This means their reading and their writing was preventing them from serving as a functioning member of society. That's tens of thousands of children. So that was in 2012 as well, when the PISA results were actually a little better than they are now. So we know there's a big problem.
Why is it so bad? What's it being put down to?
Well, there's grave concern that a big thing that's driving this is the way that reading is taught in early years. And what we have found through our investigation is that methods of teaching reading, which have been discredited for decades now, are still being used in primary schools across Wales, and they're still being, at the very least, allowed and perhaps even encouraged by the Welsh Government and the school's inspectorate, Estyn. And this method is commonly referred to as queuing, and I'm sure we'll get into what exactly that is soon. But it has a real devastating impact on pupils. I went to meet Poppy, who's 11, and her mum, Lisa, on the North Wales coast. Poppy has the reading age of a 4-year-old, and Lisa told me about how devastating this was for both of them.
In her head, she's not that big kid that can read and write independently. She spent a lot of the summer sort of, when are we going to school? What will we be doing? How will I know where I'm going? How do I know what I'm doing? Because obviously she's got a timetable, but she can't read the timetable. So it's hard.
That was Lisa there. And, Poppy's having a really tough time. She started secondary school this year, but the basic things that you'd expect any child in secondary school to be able to do, she's unable to do them.
You mentioned there queuing, and there's also phonics. So talk us through the differences between what queuing is and that versus phonics.
Yeah, so this is the technical part, but it's really interesting. I mean, it all boils down to, what do you do when you come to an unfamiliar word? The evidence tells us, and reams of it, by the way, that children need to be taught initially to go through every single letter of the word. But in the 1960s and 1970s, a new theory emerged, and one that wasn't actually based on any empirical evidence whatsoever, just a theory, that children should use cues, like pictures or the context of a sentence, to figure out what they were reading. And you can kind of see the logic behind it, because it's what those of us who can read fluently do when they come to a word they don't really understand. We'll look at the rest of the sentence and we can get a broad understanding of what that word means. But the problem is, it's not based on any evidence. Phonics, on the other hand, is the relationship between the 26 letters of the English alphabet and around the 44 speech sounds that they represent. And we can hear a snippet of what a phonics lesson sounds like from a school in Merthyr Tydfil that I went to visit as part of doing this story now. Shh. 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 So in basic form, phonics is teaching the relationship between the speech sounds and, of course, the way those sounds are represented in print, essentially.
I mean, that said, Rhys, why is it that so many schools are then not adopting the phonic method, and they're still using what we're classing now as the outdated one?
Well, what we found is that phonics is in use. The Welsh Government insists that systematic phonics is an important part of the way that reading is taught in early years. The problem is cueing strategies are also in use in lots of schools. And the evidence shows that cueing can actually undermine the phonics because essentially you're confusing the child. You're teaching them that not to focus on the letters and trying sounding out the word. You're telling them if you get stuck on a word, it's okay to look at the picture and go, ah, yes, that word, say C-O-W, they can't work out what it is. There's a picture of a cow. Oh, it's cow. The problem with that is the child hasn't actually learned to read the word. They've guessed it based on some evidence around them.
I mean, it's concerning for children across the board, but actually it's also really worrying and it might hinder disadvantaged children and those with learning difficulties as well.
That's right. I mean, lots of the experts I spoke with, insist that in particular, phonics is really important for disadvantaged pupils, those with poor vocabularies, students with a learning difficulty or who speak English as a second language, for example, it's logical that they would need more support and it's more important for them to learn the alphabetic code and be confident in the sounds that they represent. Several studies have shown that children with reading problems are much more likely to rely on the context of a sentence than good readers do. These are studies, as I keep mentioning, from decades ago. This is accepted science by this point. No serious academic says that cueing is an effective way of teaching children, very young children, to read, because what you're doing by teaching cueing essentially is teaching the strategies of poor readers.
I mean, I know we're focusing on Wales and there is a particular issue there, but how does it compare to sort of outside of Wales, other areas? Have we got a problem across the country?
Certainly in Wales and Scotland, there's evidence. In England, there was a model of teaching called the Searchlights model, which was essentially phonics and some form of cueing, which is what we have found is basically in place in Wales now. This was abolished around 15, 20 years ago now. There's a big parliamentary inquiry into it in 2005, and they found this doesn't work, it's ineffective, it could even be damaging. The best way of teaching early years reading is to do a method called systematic synthetic phonics, where you very carefully and systematically and explicitly teach children how to sound out words. That was really driven home in England over the last 10, 15 years. And as a result, the reading levels of young English children have steadily risen. They're now among the best readers in the Western world. Now, after I published this story, I had lots of academics and teachers in Scotland get in touch with me as well to say that they've got a very similar problem to Wales here, which is that in lots of classrooms, there are still cueing strategies being used as an accepted part of the curriculum, which they say is a grave concern as well. And I should say as well, this is not a problem that's unique to the UK. Around the world, this cueing was a method that originated in America and New Zealand, and it became a big part of their curriculums. And, some fantastic reporting by a journalist called Emily Hanford discovered that these cueing methods were rife in American schools. And it's led to some sweeping changes there. Some states have even legislated against cueing, banning schools from using it. States that have turned away from it, one example is Mississippi, have seen incredible increases in the reading levels of their children. It's even been dubbed the Mississippi miracle. There was such a turnaround in the fortunes of young kids there when they stopped using cueing and started mandating the systematic teaching of phonics.
I mean, you've looked into this extensively. You also looked at some inspectors' reports as well, didn't you, where you found they were actually supporting that method.
That's right. I mean, it's very difficult. The Welsh curriculum, which is probably a story for another day, but it's very vague. And the whole point of it is a new curriculum, and it's to give schools and teachers the autonomy to teach the way that they want to teach. The message from the government is schools know best and teachers know best how to teach their children. The problem, experts say, with lots of this is that it means that there's a total lottery there's so many different methods being taught. And it's difficult to find the Welsh government explicitly endorsing this method. It's sort of referenced a little bit in the curriculum, but it's not explicitly endorsed. But I went through more than 100 inspection reports, school inspection reports, and found inspectors praising these methods, saying that they were used as an acceptable part of tackling unfamiliar words. Picture cues, something that has been debunked for decades now. This is something that lots of teachers and, academics in Wales have really been worried about for some time. And they say that these methods are really deeply embedded in schools now, and teachers need to be properly trained in the science of how to teach reading. That's something that lots of experts have stressed to me. This is not the fault of the teachers. They are getting guidance, and they're not deliberately teaching things that are harmful to children. They are teaching what they think is best. The argument is that they need to be trained much better when they're training to become teachers in how to deliver effective reading instruction.
I mean, there's an argument that schools are blaming the government's blaming schools. Who is accountable?
Well, absolutely, the buck stops with the Welsh Government in terms of how education is delivered across Wales. I asked them for an interview for the Education Cabinet Secretary, Lynn Neagle. Multiple times they turned me down. I sent them a specific list of questions, and in particular, I really wanted to know, are you saying that it is acceptable to teach children that when they come to an unfamiliar word, in the initial stages of reading, they can use picture cues and context cues to tackle those words? And they didn't answer that question. They wouldn't say yes, even though it's being praised by Estyn, the school inspectorate. I also asked that question to Estyn, and they didn't answer it either. What they're both essentially saying is, we don't advocate one particular way. It's up to schools to teach reading. The problem with that approach is that, as I mentioned, you get a total lottery of what is being taught in schools. In some schools, like the ones we've visited in Merthyr Tydfil, Twyna Rodin, they're using specifically systematic synthetic phonics. They're not using any cueing at all. In another school, it's clear that the use of cueing is there. I went on school websites, and there are these posters actually encouraging parents to use these strategies at home for their kids when they're struggling. So this is a problem that is deeply sort of embedded in the education sector in Wales.
Rhys, thank you very much. A great topic to highlight. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you want to watch Rhys's full report, head over to the newsreel over on ITVX. And don't forget to subscribe to What You Need to Know and check out our back catalogue for other quick briefings on a range of headline topics. Until next time, thank you for listening.